The old metrics that are holding back the current model from transforming into a student-centric one range from the most important one being seat time. Right now we pay based on how many minutes the student sits in a seat, not how much they learn. We also have problems around teacher certifications, geographic barriers, student-teacher ratio rules. All of those things are outdated. We need to focus on outcomes and move beyond inputs. Sure thing. The biggest important thing is just we have to figure out what we want to see out of our students. What do we want them to know and be able to do? Measure those, focus there, focus a lot less on how we get there, and micromanaging every single step and process and so forth. That just distracts from the ultimate thing, and it means that every single innovation will look the exact same and we'll have no innovation. We need to free up the how and very much focus on what we want to see on the outcome side. Yeah, so Georgia's done a lot of things really well up front on online learning, from having an online learning supplemental program to really focusing on credit recovery in particular, which is a big area of need in schools. If you look at the high schools around Georgia, a lot of them can't offer courses as basic as physics. Having that online learning program there start to supplement it, really important. The other part of it is full-time online schools are really important, and so having a Georgia Virtual Academy that can serve full-time students is absolutely critical for a number of reasons, whether they're homeschooled out of choice or homebound for illness reasons or otherwise. Having that option so that they can still get the schooling that they need is absolutely critical, and Georgia's been really good about being early in setting up those options for students. Yeah, a grade-based system is completely a relic of the factory-based model because the only way we used to be able to organize schools when we went to mass education in the 1900s, meaning everyone was going to get schooling of some sort through high school, was to basically batch you up by age level, not based on what you knew, and deliver one teacher to many students so you'd get the same learning on the same day in the same way, even if you already understood those things. Or suppose you just move on even if you were still struggling with the concept and needed it to your future learning. That's how grade-based learning worked out. With online learning and digital learning, we can blow apart the notion of grades so that we can allow students to stay with their peers, but learn what's appropriate for them based on their own learning needs at any given point in time, and we can do it affordably, which is what's so exciting. Well, it's probably hard to imagine completely what it would mean, but basically inputs are where you're saying, this is the resources you need. So this is what a teacher does and looks like. This is how many students they serve. This is what a classroom exactly looks like. Those are the sorts of things that are inputs. Focusing on outcomes instead says these are the learning outcomes as measured by a range of assessments. We might have tests, we might have essays that you'd produce, portfolios of work. You can imagine a pretty vibrant ecosystem on how we would measure outcomes. And I think we need to move in that direction, quite frankly, so that we can really liberate what learning looks like. But the reality is that we have to stop measuring inputs so that we just replicate the factory model system in everything that we do. That's a broken system. It's old, it's tired, it's standardized the way we teach and test when we need customization. And everyone has these different learning needs at different times. And focusing on inputs consigns us to ignoring that fact. Yeah, there's two things going on. First, in countries, these emerging markets in developing countries, they're hungry to do well. They're hungry to climb up the ladder and compete and grow great businesses and develop a great fabric of life in their countries. And therefore, when they're totally motivated, they're motivated to do education no matter what it is so that they can get a better job, that they can create a better business and so forth. That entrepreneurial spirit right now across the world in these developing countries, that's intense, and that's something we're competing with right now. The second thing going on is that as they're educating more people in these countries, they're not going to do it the same way we did. They would be crazy to replicate the factory model system we have on the ground today. So when China needs to educate millions of people in the rural countryside to create schools and all this infrastructure we have, they're not going to do that. They're using online learning to leapfrog our system right now, and that's the big danger, is that we're going to fall behind in that race too. So not only increased competition, better school system on the outside that we're going to be facing, we've got to hurry up and catch up. Yeah, this is a really important thing to understand, which is that if you just cram digital learning or computers as a layer on top of the current system that we have today, you're not fundamentally transforming anything. You're just using it to amplify what we already do and what's already broken about the system. And so just spending on computers isn't the answer. What we need instead to be doing is taking the computers and putting it in a new model where the student is the center rather than the classroom or the teacher. The student becomes the center, and everything is focused on how do we teach that student to maximize their learning. That's the really critical thing. Online learning is going to be absolutely critical for Georgia to compete at a higher level of learning, and more importantly, so that they compete in the workplace and be economically competitive. We have to not lose sight of the end goal. It's not education for education's sake always, although that's nice, but it's also so that we can lead better lives and so forth. And online learning is going to be critical because it's going to unleash the forces of mass customization that have transformed every sector in America, from retailing to how we buy cars even, that allows us more choice and more competitiveness and more power. We need to use those forces in our education system, and with online learning we can. Yeah, so disruptive innovation is this process that basically underlies creative destruction. It's transformed every industry where upstart competitors have been able to unlodge, in often cases, monopolies and big entrenched competitors. And they do so not by taking direct aim at the organizations, but by going underneath them and around them and so forth. And in education, that means when we take this online learning, which is very much a disruptive technology, we don't start it in the mainstream. We instead started in these areas of what we call non-consumption, where the alternative is nothing at all. As budget cuts come and we have to cut back, deploy online learning so that we don't cut back the offerings for students. Use it to reach students in credit recovery. Use it to offer advanced courses where we couldn't otherwise. Started there, and bit by bit it grows, gets better, has technological and economic advantages, and piece by piece it uproots the existing system. Yeah, this is a critical thing, that online learning can drive more affordable schooling across the nation, which is really important right now in times of budget cuts. The way it's going to happen is a few things. One, it'll allow us to make content and the delivery of that far cheaper than it's been in the past, far more affordable than the textbook models we've had. The second thing it'll fundamentally change the way we use the teaching force and labor, so we can actually scale the most effective teachers to allow them to reach many more students than we ever thought was possible, which is going to make it more affordable, but also make the education system far better at the same time, which is the ultimate goal. That's exactly right. What you're going to start to see is that teachers are going to look much more like coaches, mentors, motivators. They're not going to be that person standing at the front of the room lecturing in a one-size-fits-all way or one-size-fits-none way to a mass of students. They're going to be much more coaching and mentoring and so forth, such that some of the non-academic problems that tend not to get caught right now in the system will start to get caught, and it'll be a better way to actually reach students and allow teachers to know their students far better than they can right now. What online learning really does is allows teachers to act as tutors in many ways so that they can get to know their students far better than they ever could in the traditional classroom system and catch a lot of these problems that they couldn't. We've done surveys, and online teachers consistently report that they know their students far better in the online world than they did in the traditional face-to-face one. Yeah, and I think that's the power to online learning, which is that motivation piece, right? That's the crux of all learning, is it starts with motivation so that you can attack a hard topic and so forth. And what online learning, when it's done well, does is it liberates the teacher to become that motivator and to really find the spark that turns on the student. What's interesting is that studies show that on average, online learning is better than the traditional classroom experience. It's not always, and the reason is because some online learning, it doesn't set it up that way so that the teacher can be that mentor and motivator. When they've done it right, and they free up the time and allow the teacher to assume this new role, you get great results. That's right, and we're still learning a lot about how this is going to work, but with the power of using the online learning in the blended environments for low-income students and students who are dropping out and so forth, is that the current way is not working. We can see that. They've dropped out for a reason. This allows us now to have a power of individualization to give the supports in an affordable way around the student so that they can get back on track, get their learning and so forth in a way that's convenient to them. Students drop out for a whole host of reasons. People don't often realize it, but it's because family lives get in the way. They have to work during school hours. Online learning makes it flexible, and it frees up the teachers so that they can be that valuable support to help them navigate the system and life in general. Well, I think one of the things is that, in general, that there have been fewer fights so far over online learning and the money and so forth because it's gone to these places where the alternative is nothing at all, so the mainstream system hasn't felt threatened by it. I think that's a valuable first lesson out of this. That said, where I think we're going to start to see some fights is when it starts to get better and better and starts to move into the mainstream. That's where we're starting to see some pushback and so forth because people are scared. Even the first online learning players, the first generation, they're not going to necessarily be the ones that carry this out all the way. They may get disrupted too. And they start to become part of the old guard if they were judged by the old system and built models around the old system. That's where the real challenge is going to be, is unearthing that. I think part of the disruptive innovation theory, what it says is you don't attack the monolith when he has all the power. You amass the power as you grow and get better, and then you go forward with your argument and fight the fight. That's the critical thing, I would say. Yeah, I think a critical thing is that as we move forward in this online learning world and we're starting to talk about dollars following students so that it will actually mean that the district won't always control, we have to do two things. One, say we're going to hold the online learning to a higher accountability. We're going to pay a portion of that only upon successful outcome. That should make the districts and so forth feel better that it's not just going out willy-nilly. They're not just going to lose funds. It's going toward a purpose to educate their students that they're being held account to in a better way. That's one. Two is to work with the schools to realize that they ought to strategically focus on where they really add unique value and use this online learning in a way that they can extend their school to serve the students in far more robust and rich ways than they ever otherwise could. And if they see it as a force multiplier rather than something that threatens the way they do business, I think that's both exciting, but it also should help to eliminate those fights. Now, to be fair to do that, we have to free up these school districts to be able to reallocate resources in ways that make sense for what their unique assets are. And we don't always make that so easy on the policy level because we're so consumed with controlling how they do things on the ground. People on the ground do smart things if you let them. We just have to get out of their own way. Yeah, I think the biggest barrier is that is shifting right now. A lot of states like Georgia have done a double funding model. That's not going to be a realistic thing going forward. And so getting off of that system is going to be a tough thing at first because people have become so used to it. I think it's a necessary way to start the process, but moving into the second round, that's a critical change that's going to be difficult, I think. And I think will be the biggest flashpoint. But I think if we do it in a way that focuses on that outcomes, and say we're holding them to higher account than we hold the traditional system, so hey, feel good about it, I think that's a critical strategy to advancing it. Yes, I do think that there will be savings for Georgia if we move beyond the double funding. The double funding, again, while it was a great way to start it, it's not the reality. We can't afford that going forward. And the red ink that's mounted over the last couple years, I mean, this isn't going away in school systems. Pensions, healthcare costs, they're going to eat increasingly parts of the budget, even if the economy rebounds in a way we can't foresee right now. We're going to have certainly not more dollars for schools and potentially fewer, in which case we've got to figure out more affordable ways to not strip back service for kids. Well, I think school choice will look differently from the way we've framed it. Traditionally, we've always framed it as vouchers to go through full schools. I think this a la carte model is going to be a bigger part of it, where you can still go to your neighborhood school, but you're going to have educational choice, which is even better than school choice because it's going to give you this multiplicity of opportunities from around the world, not just based on the geography in which you live. And hopefully that'll liberate some of the arguments that we've had where vouchers have gotten really heated or savings accounts have gotten really heated, whatever it might be. I think that's really important, is to say it's educational choice and everyone gets access to it. The other thing I would say is this. Vouchers have traditionally been shot at the lowest income students, so have charters for that matter. What's unique about digital learning is it's for every single child, no matter which geography, no matter what income level you are. Everyone needs this because everyone wants access to things that can affordably customize for their needs. That changes the political dynamics in some pretty interesting ways.